Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. This is John Baker, IT Pro Evangelist with Microsoft Corporation. And you can see on the bottom there, my blog is blogs.technet.com/johnbaker. And this is part 3 of 5 in my series of automatically migrating user settings during a Windows 7 upgrade using the user state migration tool. And in part 3 of 5, we're going to talk about the user state migration tool scenarios. The User State Migration Tool 4.0 series that we're doing here is split up into 5 parts. Part 1 is the overview of the User State Migration tool itself. Part 2 is we'll take a look at what's new in the USMT 4.0. Part 3 is the USMT scenarios. Part 4 is the hard link migration. And then finally on Part 5, we'll take a look at using the USMT for doing offline user state capture. Today we're going to be talking about the USMT scenarios, part 3. Before we talk about the USMT scenarios, I just want to touch on the different types of migration stores that we have available to us. There's 3 types available: uncompressed, compressed, and hard link. So what's the difference? Well, the uncompressed migration store is obviously an uncompressed directory with a mirror image of the folder hierarchy that's being migrated. So each directory and file retains the same access permissions as it had on the local file system. So we can use Microsoft Windows Explorer to view that migration store type because it's just a file structure. And settings are stored in a catalog file that also describe how to restore the files to the destination computer. Compressed, on the other hand, is a migration store that's a single image file, and it contains all the files that are being migrated and a catalog file. This image file is often encrypted and protected with a password, and it cannot be navigated with Windows Explorer. The compressed single image file that we're talking about here is very similar, if not the same, as the compressed migration image file that you have when you do a migration with the Windows Easy Transfer tool. And then finally, hard link migration, that's the new feature that we have in the USMT 4.0. And the hard link migration store functions as a map that defines how a collection of bits on the hard drive are wired into the file system. So we use that new USMT 4.0 migration store in the PC refresh scenario only. So it's only if we're installing the operating system on the same machine is where we want to use this hard link migration store. And this is because the hard link migration store is maintained locally on that computer while the old operating system is removed and the new operating system is installed. And then using the hard link migration store saves a whole bunch of network bandwidth as well as minimizes the server use needed to accomplish the migration. The thing to note here that if you don't have at least 250 megabytes of free space, it will not be able to create that hard link migration store. So you need to make sure you have that free space on the drive before you do it. Okay, so here are our 2 user state migration tool scenarios. On the left, we've got the PC refresh, which is you're going to have a single machine that had the old operating system, whether it be Windows XP or Windows Vista, and we're going to install Windows 7 onto that machine. So that's a PC refresh scenario. The PC replace scenario on the right-hand side has the old machine and a new machine. So we're going to store off from the old machine onto a server. We'll store off that user's migration file, and then we're going to restore that migration file onto the new Windows 7 machine. So let's talk in a little bit detail about these 2 scenarios. So let's take a more detailed look at the refresh scenario. And you can see we've got 3 different options in the refresh scenario. But the basic process for a refresh is to run the scan state and either store the data locally with the hard link migration store or remotely on a network share, and then install the operating system and then run load state to restore the data either from hard link or from the server. So there's 2 new scenarios that we have in USMT 4.0, and you can see the second and third one there, the refresh using the hard link migration store and the refresh using the Windows old or the Windows.old and the hard link migration store. Okay, so let's talk about these 3 choices. So the first one at the top is the PC refresh using a compressed migration store. So in this example, we're going to have the user is going to keep the same computer, and we're just going to get the operating system updated. So the administrator runs the scan state command line tool on each of the computer and saves the user state to a computer. So let me run that there. So the scan state collects the user data, saves it to a migration store up on a server. Once we've got that done, we then install Windows 7 or the new operating system's installed, and then we finally run the load state command line. Load state restores the user state back onto the source computer, so it brings it back from the migration store. Thing to note there, you'll notice that data had to go across the wire to be stored on that migration store server and then come back, so it takes a lot longer than the next choice down in the middle, which uses the HardLink migration store. So in the case of the HardLink migration store, the administrator runs a scan state command line on each computer specifying the /HardLink command line option. So the scan state saves the user state to the HardLink migration store on each computer. And this basically improves performance because now we don't have any traffic going across the network to take the data back and forth. So it saves a lot of space and a lot of time. Once what happens is the files and the HardLink store are protected so that they cannot be overwritten when you install the new operating system. So they're basically quarantined. So after the quarantine of the HardLink migration store, the administrator uninstalls the old operating system and installs the new Windows 7 operating system. And then the load state command is run with the HardLink option that now restores the user state back to the computer. So and remember, this is going to be a lot quicker because the files are actually still on the hard drive and the HardLink store is there pointing to those files. The final option is the PC refresh using Windows Old and the HardLink migration store. So what happens here is the administrator does a clean install of Windows 7 on each computer, making sure that the Windows Old directory is created by installing Windows 7 without formatting and without repartitioning, and by selecting a partition that contains either Windows Vista or Windows XP. So Windows 7 is installed, and then once Windows 7 is installed, the administrator runs scan state and load state command line tools successively with the HardLink command line option. So it's going to run that scan state against the Windows Old directory, do a HardLink migration on it, and then run the load state with the HardLink option to bring them into the Windows 7 environment. Well, we saw the refresh scenario, but here we have the replace scenario. And again, just like refresh, we have three options: the manual network migration, the managed network migration, and the offline migration using Windows PE. So let's take a look at the manual network migration. You can see over on the right, I have a migration store, which is my server, and then I have my source computer, which is my old Windows Vista or my old Windows XP machine, and my brand new computer is my destination computer, has nothing on it at the moment. So the first thing I'm going to have done is I'm going to do a scan state to collect the user state from the source computer and save that state to my migration store. Now I have that state on the migration store. I can now install a new operating system on my new destination computer, and then once that operating system is installed, I can run a load state and restore the user state onto that destination computer. So in the case of the managed network migration, the administrator is using some kind of tool, whether it be System Center Configuration Manager or a logon script or a batch file or some other non-Microsoft management technology. Bottom line, what the administrator does is it has that technology run the scan state tool on the source computer. The scan state is going to collect the user state from each source computer and save it to a server, just like we did in the manual migration, but this is all being done automatically through scripts of some kind or through a management tool. Then that management tool or the administrator has the operating system and applications installed on the new destination computer, and then on each of those new destination computers, the administrator has the load state tool run through whatever management tool we're using or through whatever logon script or through a batch file to bring that, have load state, bring that user state back from the migration store onto the new computer. And then finally here on the online migration using Windows PE, on each source computer, the administrator boots the machine into Windows PE. Then from Windows PE, it runs, the administrator runs scan state to collect the user state and save it either to the server, a migration store on the network, or to a local hard drive. And then once it has it at that server share or on the local hard drive, then on the new computer, the administrator can install a new operating system and applications, and then the administrator can then run the load state tool to bring back the user state from the migration store or from the hard drive, the external hard drive that it was saved to. The great thing about doing the offline migration using Windows PE, if you have a machine that won't boot up or you're having problems booting it up, the fact is that it's able to scan that offline operating system to get the user data files off and put them into a migration store. Okay, demonstration time. So we're going to do two things in this demonstration. We're going to create a migration script using XML for use with the USMT 4.0, and then we're going to edit that migration script and specify settings to be captured during a migration. Now in this demonstration, we're going to be planning the migration by building some USMT 4.0 migration scripts. But before we do that, I want to examine the USMT template files. So remember, the USMT 4.0 includes two command line utilities that use XML-based migration scripts to assist the automation of the migration process. So in this demonstration, we're going to build the USMT 4.0 scripts that will be used to migrate the files and settings for all the users from a Windows XP computer onto a Windows 7 computer. Before I do that, though, I want to remind you about the three XML files that the USMT uses. Number one, migapp.xml, and that's used to control the application settings that are migrated. The miguser.xml identifies the files, the folders, the file types, and the desktop settings that are migrated. And finally, the migdocs.xml, that was introduced with USMT 4.0, and that file dynamically identifies user documents and folders for migration at runtime. So, before we go any further, let's take a look at the migapp.xml file. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up my computer, and I'm going to browse on my C drive to my program files, because remember, the USMT is part of the Windows Automated Installation Kit, and the Windows Automated Installation Kit is right there under program files. So let me open that up, and then obviously it's a tool in the Windows Automated Installation Kit, so let me open up the tool folder. There you can see all the different tools that are related, and the one I specifically want today is the USMT. And then under the USMT folder, you can see I've got 64-bit and 86. And then under the USMT folder, you can see I've got two folders, the AMD64 and the x86. So in my case, I want the x86 folder. So let me open that up. And then under the x86 folder, you can see there's my USMT for x86. Here's my migapp.xml document. Here's my migdocs. And here's my miguser. Okay, so those are the three important XML files that are used by the USMT. So let me go to the migapp.xml. I'm going to right click on it and open it with my XML editor. There we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for Microsoft Office. I just want to show you Office 2007. Okay, so here's Office 2007. Here's my pattern type registry that I was talking about, and here's my pattern type file. This is the Office suite. Let's specifically look at Outlook. So let me just type in Outlook, and this will take us down specifically to look at Outlook 2007. Oh, I need Office. There we go. And Outlook 2007 is right here. So let me scroll down a little. And here you can see, remember I told you you can have includes, and in this case we're including these patterns. So there's some files and some registry settings that are included there. And you can also have, if I come down here, exclude. And let me gather that. There we go. And there we have some registry settings that are excluded. Okay, so let me close out of this. So we just took a quick look at the migapp.xml file. So now what we're going to do in this part of the demonstration is create a config.xml file using scanstate and the /genconfig switch. So we can create these custom XML files to customize our migration to fit our unique needs. So in this case here, I'm just going to do a very simple demonstration. I'm going to create the custom config.xml file, and then I'm going to go into that config.xml file, and I'm going to change it so that my users do not migrate any music, whether it be from the My Music folder or from the Shared Music folder. So how do we do this? Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to do a scan state with the genconfig switch. And what the genconfig switch does is it generates this config XML file, but it does not create a store. So you need to ensure that this file contains every component, every application, and every setting that can be migrated. So you need to create this on a source computer that contains all those components, applications, and settings that are going to be present on the destination computer. So, and you'll see in a moment, because remember, I've got a fairly limited machine here that only has a few applications. So let me bring up my command prompt. And in my command prompt, I want to get to my program folder, so program files, and then under Windows AIK, under Tools, under USMT, under x86, and there we are under x86. So now what I'm going to do, in order to create this config XML file, I'm going to run a scan state. I'm going to include the migapp.xml. I'm also going to include the miguser.xml. And then I'm going to do the genconfig, and I'll call this config.xml. And this will generate my config.xml file. So now it's going through, it's going to pull up, examine what we have out here. You can see, there we go, we've got a couple of users. Okay, now we're done. So now let me go into Notepad, and I'll show you how we can customize this. So here's my config.xml. Go into Notepad, let me maximize this so you can see it. And you can see in this XML file we've got all the components, the applications, the documents, and the Windows components, and that's all coming from what we've just scanned. So in this case here, I've got a My Music document that's by default is yes to migrate, so I'm going to change that to no. And also I'm going to change Shared Music to migrate. I'm going to say no to that as well. So we're making a little bit of a customization here. So let me save that. I also want to show you, remember I talked about the error control section. So we have an area now where we can include errors. So let me scroll down. And in the bottom here, here's my error control. You got an example of an error. So by using the genconfig command line option, it creates or generates this sample error control section. And this is where we can specify error messages and desired behaviors. Bottom line is we can do, whether it be file or registry read or write errors, all of these can be included in here to specify which ones can be safely ignored when we use the /C switch in the scan state command. And the /C switch is just to continue on soft errors, and this is where we could configure some soft errors or non-fatal errors that we want to have. And also remember I talked about the profile control. If I come down here, if you remember I talked about if you had users that were local administrators in XP, and we want to map those users from being local administrators in XP to just being regular users in Windows 7, here is where we have that profile control. So you can see here we have an example which specifically does exactly that, changes the users group from administrators to users. And of course, obviously, you can come in here and create custom group mappings if you have other group mappings as well. So let me minimize that and exit out of the demo. And that concludes part 3 of our 5-part series on the user state migration tool. Up next is part 4, and in part 4 we're going to take a more in-depth look at the new feature in the USMT 4.0 called the hard link migration. So thanks for listening, and join me in part 4.